Hi everyone, and welcome back to my War Games hobby channel. Now if you watched last week, I put a game on between regulars and militia. This is from the American War of Independence, and if you remember, it didn't go too well at all for the militia. In fact, the militia did have some rifles in support, but because they were so delayed in coming on, and because I had the units of militia in minimum size of 6s, and because I rolled so badly on their morale dice, it was a bit of a sort of a walkover for the British regulars. That was no fault of the rules, of course. I was happy the way it went. I just rolled so badly, and I felt in reflection that maybe the militia should be maybe slightly bigger, would benefit from being bigger sizes. So I'm doing that game again. I'm just replaying it completely. The terrain is exactly as it was, and the scenarios are the same as well. I'm just replaying it with bigger units of militia, 2 units of 16 rather than 4 of 6. And I've reduced the size of the rifle units because they were quite expensive, they were quite big, and they didn't need to be. Of course, the other thing is that hopefully I won't roll as badly. The other thing, of course, which was quite important, was that the cards just didn't play well for the American side. So all in all, it was a bit of a walkover for the British. Although, as it happens, the casualties were about the same, but the militia basically all run off because they had to do a morale test because of the volley fire. So if you watch that, you'll see what I mean. So I'm having another game now. So I just want to go through what's happened so far in that game. So here we are. The first thing that I want to mention here is when the cards were dealt. The first thing happened was that the red clock card came out, so we had to do a random event. But the random event was something that I forget what it was now, but it was something about casualties, and it was the very first move of the game. So in fact, it was a bit of a. It didn't matter. It had no impact on the game whatsoever. But the cards that were dealt and the first 6 cards that came out really benefited the Americans. These are the first 6 cards that came out, and as you can see, there's only 1 red card. The British had their morale card, which did them no favours whatsoever, but the Americans had 3 blue cards, and the Brits had 2 blue cards as well. So 5 of the first 6 cards that came out have favoured the Americans, which is why you can see that unlike the first game, not only have the militia come on and they've manoeuvred a little bit, but the rifles have done 2 moves as well, so they're moving up, and in fact they're looking likely to be able to capture this rocky ground, which is quite a strategic advantage to them. Whereas in the last game, the British infantry, light infantry at the back of the wood there, were there before the Americans really even moved onto the table. So it's a complete different game. This is what we're seeing so far anyway, completely different. And the other thing is, because the British have had no regular cards come out, they haven't moved at all. They're still in their starting positions. So the British are sitting there waiting, doing absolutely nothing, and all the American forces have moved on and they're supporting each other, unlike the last game. So already this game looks like it's going to be quite different as to how it's going to turn out. There's been no shooting at all yet, it's been just manoeuvring, and it is now the American turn. So what I'm going to do is I'll do the next few turns and then I'll come back and show you what's happened. Okay, well, a couple of things have happened. The first thing is you'll see that the rifles have moved nearer to this rocky ground, and these haven't come out of wood. They've captured their objective marker, but they're staying in the cover of the wood. Now at the moment, these 2 units actually can't see each other because they're too far away and in dense cover, so they can't spot each other. But these 2 units actually can, because there's not much cover. Obviously they're not in cover, and these are only just in cover anyway, although they get the dense cover bonus. They don't get anything else. They're both scouts anyway, so they both get a +1. So say these are all in sight of each other, but these two units actually can't see each other at the moment. The British have also finally moved up. Well, you can see the ones in the Woodhead, which I've just shown you, and these have moved up as well here. They want to get within volley fire. They are now within 16 inches of the militia. There we are. The rear rank is as well, so all those will be able to fire. So it's going to be pretty devastating when they do open fire. And in fact, it is the Americans' turn. So they've used a provincial card, which is only this officer. He's the only figure on the table that can use that card, because these are militia. And although they gain a benefit from him being there, because they're auxiliary militia, they don't actually move if the provincial card comes up. They move when the militia card comes up. So this guy's just moved forward slightly, that's all. Now the British have two cards. They have provincials, so they could in fact let that officer move again, or they have the militia card. Well, they won't want to play that card, that's for sure. So what they're going to do is they're going to use 3 of their command points, and that means that this unit here, or one of these 2 units, it's up to me to decide which one, will be able to open fire on the militia. And we'll do that now, because this is going to be quite crucial. So I think I'll make it this close unit. It's a unit of 10. It has to fire straight ahead. So we just got to see who's in range straight ahead. Well, this unit back here is not in range at all for volley fire. So it's only going to hit the front unit. I think they were rather hoping they'd get both, but they can't. And they fire straight ahead. So there's 8 figures, including the officer. I have to test to see whether they hit the target or not. So I'll roll 60. They're hitting on noughts and ones. Let's just see what happens. Well, absolutely nothing with the first 6. There's 2 more for the militia. Again, nothing, no hits at all. And the officer also, there's no hits. So the British didn't do that well. Let me just get a bit of smoke. And then I'll also put down 2 fire markers, because they've done volley fire. But, and this is where, in the last game I played, things went totally to pieces for the militia, because they do have to do a morale test, and so does the officer. So let's throw for the officer first. I don't know whether you can see that. 1. My dice throwing is hopeless. Actually, while we're at it, remember they've got 1, and the militia unit as well got 3. Dear oh dear. Well, let's just see what happens now. Because the provincial officer rolled a 1. Let's just see what difference that makes to him. Well, he is an officer. He gets a +1 anyway, so that's 2. And the minuses are being shot at by a unit in close formation by volley fire and 2 ranks deep, so it's -2. So it goes back to 0. Actually, they're just, he has to flee, as you can see on there. I don't know whether you can see the light shining on it, but he does have to flee. If it had been 1 below that, luckily the fact that he's an officer saved him. If it had been a unit, they'd have been in trouble. But he's got to flee, so he's got to go back 4 inches, facing the other way. He didn't like it, but amazingly he did survive. Let's put just a flee marker down there. Let's now do the militia. They rolled a 3. They get a +1 for the officer being nearby. And here's the big difference. They are a unit of at least 10 figures. So that's another +2. So that gives them a total of 6. Then they lose the 2 for being shot at by volley fire. Because although they didn't take a casualty, they still have to test for being shot at by volley fire. So they get a -1 for being shot at by volley fire, and another -1 for being shot at by a form unit in close order. So they're down to 4, and a conscript unit on 4 is in fact flee, so they flee as well. So although in fact if they, so they're on 4, yeah, it wouldn't have made any difference if there'd been a small unit. If there'd been a unit of 6, they would have been on 2. It's still flee. It makes no difference, in fact. So the militia, due to my pretty awful rolling, are also fleeing, and they haven't even fired yet. But they didn't like it. Now let's just put them away. So you can see how flaky militia are. They just put a flea marker down. So the first volley fire from the first British unit has caused the militia to run away. So unfortunately my terrible dice rolling yet again is not what the Americans needed, really. But there we go. So that's what they've done. The British, that was their first, spending 3 command points. They've managed to cause a bit of panic in the American militia ranks. We just got to hope that they stop running away next turn. So it's the Americans to go. They've only got the morale card. They can't do anything with that, really. Right, so a bit of an update now. What's happened here is these American militia here open fire on the British unit here. Unfortunately, because they're long range and because they're firing over marshy ground, they were only hitting on 9s, and they failed to score. Well, they did score 1 hit, but it was saved. The British didn't lose any casualties, and they've since reloaded. This unit has now moved up. The reason they've moved up rather than turned an open fire is because quite frankly, they're going to be difficult to hit in that rocky ground. They're going to be quite a hard target. So I think the British have decided the best way to get the Americans out of that rocky ground is probably a bayonet charge. So they're moving up to do that. At the top end here, the British light infantry opened fire at those Americans in the woods. There was only 4 men anyway. They lost 1 and had to withdraw. They're not fleeing. They just got a recoil, which they went back 5 inches. So that's where we are, and the British are looking a little bit happier now. In fact, they've not lost a figure yet. They've seen off 1 lot of militia, and they're hoping that they don't roll good for morale when it is their turn, and they're pushing them back in the woods. The biggest problem they got are these guys in that rocky ground. They are going to be very difficult to get out of there, but we'll see. Quite an interesting development now. The Americans have played the forward boys card. So this officer here activated this unit to reload, and this officer here activated this unit to fire at the advancing British. And when they opened fire, they actually got 4 hits, because they normally hit on 5s anyway, and they're short range, they got no minuses. And they also, because they're sharpshooters, they re-roll any 0s, and they got 4 hits, 3 of which ended up causing a casualty. So the British have taken 3 casualties here. That means it's got to take a reaction test. So it's rolled a 4. Again, my not brilliant rolling for morale. Now the officer is within 6 inches. Let me just check that. Yes, he is. So they get +1 for that. They get +1 for being a unit of 6. So they're now on 6. And the unit is still formed up. So it gets a +2 for that. It's on 8. But it did suffer 3 casualties from shooting. So it's back down to 6. With trained units, there we are. It's recoil or shaken. So it has a choice to either recoil or become shaken. I'll make them shaken because they don't want to fall back any further. They're trying to attack that position, so they're shaken. It's not a disaster for the British, but they have lost three figures. So at the moment, in fact, the British are losing. They've lost 3. The Americans, despite the retreating militia, have only lost 1 figure. Now it's the American turn. The Americans had to play the British regulars card, which then gives them 3 command points, which they need in a minute, which I'll explain why. But the British regulars therefore reloaded these. Now these were shaken, but they rolled a good morale dice, so they've moved up as well. They removed the shaken marker and moved up, and the light infantry have moved up in the woods, but they're still unloaded. So it's the British turn. They're going to use their 2 command points, and they're going to charge this unit into the rifles. So the American riflemen do have an option to run away, or do they stand and fight? If they run away, the British will take that rocky ground, which will be difficult for them. So they're going to fight. So quite a few things have happened now. The militia here have recovered and moved up to get closer to this unit to open fire on it. This unit did try volley fire on the militia here. They didn't cause any casualties again, and in fact the militia rolled a very good morale dice. They rolled a 9, so they didn't have a problem with that. The British infantry in the middle here charged the rifles in the rocky ground, and although they lost 1 man, they managed to kill 2 Americans, so they had to fall back. They lost 2 more by retreating, and then they did a bad morale test a move later and left the field. They routed. The British infantry in the wood have moved up, and they're now reloaded, and in the other wood the 3 Americans there opened fire but did no damage at all. And you see the officer lying down there. He's just become a casualty because this unit opened fire and they managed to kill him. So that's where we are. The British have lost 4 figures. The Americans have lost a unit of 6 rifles, another rifleman from the woods, and one of their officers. But the militia are moving up and are now within 12 inches of the British. So when it is their turn next, that could well be an important factor. If they shoot well before they have to do another reaction test, it might turn things around. There, the officers moved up a bit further as well. We've had 2 complete reshuffles of the cards so far. So we are, about halfway through. And at the moment, maybe the British have got a slight advantage, but if the militia, when they open fire, do cause a lot of damage on the British infantry, which are now both within 12 inches, then that could be decisive. We'll just have to wait and see. Okay, latest update is this. The British regulars loaded here. In here they opened fire on the rifles in the wood. They lost 1 man, but their morale was very good, so they're still there, although they're still out unloaded. And down here, this unit fired volley fire on the unit that was here. They caused 1 casualty, and they did get flee again, a poor morale dice. But fortunately for them, they had 3 command chips. So this move, they've used them to stop them running away, and now they're formed up again. So the militia are still sort of there, although they're not doing a great deal. And unfortunately for them, they're just not getting the cards. You see, at the moment, they've only got the Provincials card and the Forward Boys British card, so they still can't actually shoot. They're desperate to open fire and hopefully cause some damage to these British, but the card isn't coming up. They've used the command points to stop these running away, because it was possible that if they didn't do that, they might have gone off the table next move, so it was too risky. They had to stop them running. And that's where we are. The Americans are holding their own, but they're not able to open fire with their militia, which is what they want to do. Frustrating for them. The British are really turning the screw now. They used the blue morale card, which meant that they can force a morale test on the American unit that was over here in the wood. Unfortunately for them, they didn't roll very well. Less than 3 figures in the unit, or -3, plus another -3 for test follows the resolution of morale card. So they rolled a 5, but they get no bonuses, and -6, so they were -1. Off they went. They routed. So the entire rifles units have gone now from the American side, which is a great shame because they were, I thought, quite a strong unit, but both of those have now gone. The ones in the middle here were in the rocky ground, got bayonet charged by the infantry here, and the ones in the wood got shot to bits and routed. So it's just down to the militia now to win the game for the Americans, which is looking increasingly hard. Right, it is the Americans' turn now. Okay, more developments over here and over here. When this unit was in the marsh, they managed to open fire. These ones completely missed the ones in rocky ground because they get solid cover. So it's like what they call an impossible shot. They needed 9s to hit. Well, they didn't roll any 9s at all. Even if they did, the chances of actually causing casualties were pretty slim, but they missed completely. So, but they are still there. Over here, this militia did open fire on the British and caused 2 casualties. The morale was shaken, but next move they could rally, which they did, and immediately, because they were loaded, they opened fire with volley fire on the militia, caused 2 casualties, and the reaction test meant they had to flee. So these are fleeing at the moment, and these are unloaded. And it is now the British turn. They've only got 1 card, which is the militia card, the blue militia card, which they'll play. So these guys will just reload. That's pretty straightforward. And these have to try and stop running away. Let's see what they roll. Oh, 9. That's pretty good. So they have stopped running away. So the militia, the fact that there are bigger units does stop them. If they'd been smaller units, I think by now they would have gone. Right, the third clock card's come up. So we're just about to start the 4th turn. So I'm going to shuffle all the cards, the ones that are in the discard pile. Well, the game's all over. So what happened then? Well, briefly, there was a firefight going on in the middle here between the militia and the British regulars. But the guys in the rocky ground just cannot be hurt, really. The light infantry came out of the woods, and because they're in extended order, they really can't be hurt. These could be, but the unit here just fired abysmally this time and didn't get any hits at all. And then both these units were fired at. First one, the British here fired volley fire at this unit, and they caused a casualty, only 1 casualty, but then they rolled a 0 on the dice, so off they went the table. They routed off the table. This unit in the middle here was fired on by both the other British units, and they got a flee, and they managed to stop, but then the next move tried to rally. They needed the rally value being 7, but they rolled a very poor 2, and they ended up having to flee again. So they went off the table as well. So that's it. The game is over. The same result as last time. The British won, but not such a resounding victory. It's still very much down to what you roll on morale dice. With militia, if you roll badly when you have to take a morale test, you are in deep trouble. And if you roll very badly, then you just can't keep them on the table. The bigger size unit certainly helped them, and they would have gone off earlier. And had they been able to shoot a bit more effectively, at one point I thought they were going to damage this unit. They actually, in the end, the British lost 6 casualties, 2 on here and 4 on this unit. But it wasn't enough. The militia just couldn't compete with the regulars, which I think is absolutely fine. Even big units of militia, they need to get really close to do the damage, and they just didn't roll when they had the opportunities. They had a chance when they were both within 12 inches at one point. But the trouble is, these in rocky ground are almost then impossible to hit, because you're hitting them on what's known as an impossible shot. And these guys, although they took two, the morale, just kept them there. Whereas, on the other hand, if the militia have to do morale tests, they're more likely to run. So I think it's a very true reflection of what would happen in that period. The militia fine, and they can open fire and hopefully do some damage, but once they get fired upon themselves, then they're going to be in trouble. They could just run off. The big disappointment for me on the American side was how poorly the American riflemen performed. Initially, when they got into this rocky ground here, I thought they were in a winning position. But of course, the British soon realised that shooting at them was going to be absolutely a waste of time. So that unit charged in. They did lose 4 men all totally to shooting and in the melee. But once the rifles that were in there got pushed back, they lost 2 more when they retreated anyway from the combat. And then they got shot at again, and they did a bad test, and they went off the field. And the very last unit in the wood over there only started off 4 strong anyway, so that was never going to do much against the other light infantry coming through the other woods. So yeah, the British, the better quality of the British troops made them very, very difficult to beat, especially once they took that rocky ground. It did start off, I felt, the advantage was with the American side, because the British didn't move for ages, and the Americans came on. They just about took that rocky ground. The militia were here, and it all looked very strong. But then when they started rolling bad dice, it all started to go horribly wrong again. And as I say, losing the rocky ground was a critical point. The British did well there. So a very enjoyable game again. I do like these rules. In fact, the more I play them, the more I like them. I've not had a poor game with them yet. I think, like any rules, you can do everything right, but if you roll badly, you're not going to win. Likewise, you do need a bit of luck. Yeah, it's a very, very good rule set, and this is the 4th game I've played now, and I'm looking forward to the next one. I'll have to come up with a different scenario, maybe use different troop types, and maybe even do quite a big game, because I've got plenty of time at home at the moment. I'm only playing solo anyway. I can just set up a big game on this table and just spend as long over it as need be. Hopefully soon I'll be able to play one of the guys from the club, because although the club isn't open yet, I can set up my table outdoors and have a friend come round. As long as we stay 2 meters away, hopefully we'll be able to get a game. I'll have to do all the movement of all the figures. I'll have to deal all the cards. All he'll have to do is bring his own dice. But it'd be nice to get a game against an opponent rather than do it solo. I do try and be totally independent and neutral when I play a solo game, but at the moment it's always seems to be going the British way. So the next game I have, I'm going to make it the Continentals are going to be out, not the militia. And I shall make them good quality Continentals, so post Valley Forge, and we'll see what the British can do about that. Okay, right, well, good to see you all, and I'll see you again soon.